Okay, I'll call this meeting to order. I'm Jason Dean, Chairman of the Mississippi Board of Education, present here today in Madison, 18th, 2020 at 10:06 a.m. via teleconference and video means pursuant to Mississippi Code annotated section 2541.5. Notice of this meeting was posted in accordance with state law. It included the date, time, place, and purpose of the meeting and identified the location recorded. The meeting is also being live streamed. Dr. Carrie Wright is present in Jackson, Mississippi. I think that's where you are. To participate in this teleconference meeting. To find us the city and state that you're in to ensure that we have quorum and identify your presence at this meeting. Mrs. Rosemary Altman.
I'm present in Clinton, Mississippi.
Dr. Karen Elam.
Present in Oxford, Mississippi.
Mr. Glenn East.
Present in Gulfport, Mississippi.
Dr. Ronnie McGehee.
Present, Madison, Hernando, Mississippi.
Miss Amy Zhang.
Present in Starkville, Mississippi.
All righty. Good morning, everybody. It looks like a quorum of the board is present at the location stated for the purpose of conducting a meeting through teleconference and video means. The December 17th, 2020 board meeting is now called to order at 10:08 a.m. Since this is a teleconference meeting, please identify yourself when asking questions, making comments, or making motions. Please mute yourself at other times to avoid any of the background noise. I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and I have asked Mr. East to do the invocation. Here's our handy dandy flag here. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you will, bow your heads. Heavenly Father, as we meet today, please open our hearts and our minds so that we may make the decisions that positively impact all the boys and girls in the state of Mississippi. Continue to guide those that work every day in the schools across our state as they work with Mississippi's most important future resource, our children. In the midst of this current pandemic, please protect those healthcare leaders and workers who are tirelessly working to take care of all of us. And Father, as we close out 2020, please constantly remind us that as we journey through a new year, it is our role to do all the good we can, by all the means we can, in all the ways we can, in all the places we can, at all the times we can, to all the people we can, as long as we ever can. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Okay, next on the agenda is approval of minutes of the October 15th board meeting. You should have a copy of those in front of you. I need a motion in a second.
Second.
Okay, I got a motion from Ms. Altman and a second from Mr. East. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Next, we'll move to the approval of the, okay, yeah, I'm just, I'm gonna do my best. If you're a board member, just so that we can ensure everyone's recorded. So if you're on mute and you're voting, get off of mute. Okay, approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions? Not hearing any. Are there any items on the consent agenda that members would like to pull out for discussion? If so, I'll entertain a motion to do so now. Okay, no changes or deletions. So the agenda's been presented in front of you. I just need a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved by Karen Elam.
Second, Ronnie McGehee.
Hey, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hear none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? No opposition. The agenda is set. We'll move to the report of the state superintendent. Dr. Wright.
Hey, thank you. The Connects initiative, our telework policy, some impact on the proposed FY 2022 budget and proposed cuts to the department, as well as the MAAP calculations. Those will come a little bit later. And I also want to give you an update on our enrollment status. I've been meeting with Student Advisory Council. That's always just incredibly invigorating. They are working in small groups on issues that they want to address and that they would like to see addressed by the department. And so I really want to congratulate our two board representatives, our student representatives, because they are really stepping up in a wonderful way in a leadership role to guide this group. We have been, went to DeSoto to congratulate the Center Hill High school. It was a blue ribbon award and beautiful day. It was all outside, but just a fantastic award. Mississippi this year received 4 schools that earned the status of National Blue Ribbon, and Center Hill High was one of those. I have been asked to attend. I did 2 hearings in the Senate, one on year-round schools and a year-round school calendar and the implications of that. Dr. Lee Childress was there as well and talked about the successes and challenges that he has had. I also attended a hearing and spoke on dual credit, dual enrollment. I do believe that this is going to be a topic of conversation for this legislative session. And as I've said to you before, very supportive of dual credit, dual enrollment courses. The issue that we have is the equity issue around access and cost. And so I think that's going to be part of our legislative conversation. I have continued to meet with the medical field around the expansion of telehealth and teletherapy. We're down to a smaller group now and meeting again in January. We're hoping to be able to launch that sometime mid to late spring, but we're getting a lot closer to finalizing those presentations. I did several presentations over the web, national presentations, one with the Aspen Institute on climate change. I did 2, Excel and Ed renamed their virtual conference EdPalooza. So I was on 2 different sessions to talk about literacy and the work that we're doing here in Mississippi. Also, the Stennis press conference was held. Lots of questions around our Mississippi Connects, lots of questions around what we're doing academically, but trying to get information out to as many people as we can about what is transpiring around the state where education is concerned. We still have the National Assessment Governing Board met. They met for 2 days, as did Chiefs for Change at their annual meeting. Also, we have reinstituted the Children's Health Council. And so we're trying to get that up and running to address and coordinate efforts where that's concerned. I also had a meeting with what we call the sister agencies. So it was Medicaid, the Department of Health, Health and Human Services, Mental Health, the Child Protective Services, and we're all trying to come together to ensure that the services that we're providing, that we're not replicating, that we're not stepping over each other, that they're more complementary. So this is a group that's going to continue to meet so that we can try and figure out a way to better communicate the families that may be rising to the surface that we need to all kind of come around. But I'll keep you posted as that goes on. I just completed the Teacher Advisory Council. That's always great. It's great to hear what they're doing. It's great to hear the successes that they're having, the challenges that they're facing. They're very good about letting us know the professional development that they need. And that is, of course, something that we're pivoting to now. We've set up a very big professional development team to provide PD to all of our teachers virtually. And you'll be hearing more about that. Several interviews. I won't go into all the specifics, but WTVA, WLOV, Politico, McKinsey, WABT, JT Supertalk, Chalkbeat, and WJTV all did interviews, all having different aspects, some on enrollment, some on our Mississippi Connects, but it really is a chance for us to really tell our story in a very big way. So I'll hold on that, and I want to also then move to our updates because these are things that I think are going to be top of the list for us to keep our eyes on. So we're going to start with Mississippi Connects, and this has been a true team effort. John Craman has led this work, but Felicia Gavin's team has been right there behind him because, as you know, part 1 was getting the devices, but part 2 was making sure that districts were reimbursed. So I'm going to ask John Craman and Felicia then to update you on both halves of that. So, John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Wright. So the first thing I would just want to remembering is that since we didn't have a chance to meet last month, the meeting would have been right around the time we completed delivery. And so I can report that all devices have been delivered. They were all delivered prior to close of business on November 20th, with one minor exception that we got delivered right after Thanksgiving of about 100 devices. So all in all, we were able to deliver over every single device that was expected, and except for about 100 devices. It was all delivered exactly on time. And the real story after that, of course, comes with the reimbursements. And I'll turn this over to Dr. Gavin to walk us through our success there.
Good morning. As you know, December 15th was the deadline for us to finish processing the reimbursements before the money was swept. And I am pleased to announce that we have crossed the finish line. And as Dr. Wright said, it was certainly a collaborative effort between Mr. Craman's team and the operation team. The team put in some long hours. Never once did anyone complain about the long days and the late nights that were required. I mean, the team put in hundreds of hours to ensure that every district received their reimbursement before the December 15th deadline. We actually processed nearly 1,000 documents, including the multiple grant agreements that we had to process, and approximately 490 reimbursements were processed. And this was all a manual process, as we did not run these grants through MCAPs. We did not have time to get the grants put into the system. So this whole process was a manual process. So I want to personally thank my team for all of the hard work they put in. On the operations side, it was led by Elisha Campbell, who's the Director of Grants Management. She made sure that everything was running smoothly. Monique Corley is our Procurement Director. She made sure all of the grants were signed and everything was legal there. And Sheila Bowie and her team made sure that every reimbursement was actually processed through Magic. So hats off to each of them as well as their teams. They couldn't have done it without their teams. So I certainly want to thank them and their teams for all of their work. As far as the actual reimbursement for House Bill 1788, we actually reimbursed 79% of the $50 million that was allocated, a total of $39.4 million out of the $50 million. And we did have 144 out of the 150 public school districts participate. We had 31 out of the 121 independent schools participating, and 100% participation from the Choctaw Tribal, and that's for House Bill 1788. For Senate Bill 3044, ETLA, we allocated out of the 149.7 million, we actually reimbursed $147.7 million. So 99% of those funds actually went out the door. So we're very pleased with that. So we certainly want to thank the legislature for appropriating those funds to allow us to put devices into every student's hand and to help increase connectivity across the state. So if there are no questions, I will turn it back over to Mr. Craman.
Any questions from the board? All right.
No question, John. No, Glenn East, no questions. Outstanding job from the school end on the delivery and receipt of that equipment and also the funding. So great job.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to add that John Hartley and Josh Huey were my right and left hands on the efforts within OTSS, but there was a lot of people who were involved in the heavy lift here, and there's a lot of things to go around. I do think that it's worth also noting that in the last month or so, in addition to the conversations that Dr. Wright has had at the national level, I've also been involved in a couple of international calls with people around not just the United States taking notice of what we accomplished in Mississippi, but across the planet, trying to figure out how they could learn from what we've accomplished here in a short amount of time. Just as a reminder too, that this all started with some legislation that passed on July 9th. Within 6 weeks, we had contracts, and within 3 months, we had all these devices delivered. And then within less than a month of that, we had all the dollars out the door that the districts requested and the private schools as well. So I would also just echo what Dr. Gavin said, that there was great collaboration between OTSS and operations. A lot of late hours, a lot of staff working, and as she said, there was never even a grumble about all this stuff. There was never a hiccup in terms of the flow of information and support between OTSS and operations. And I really would applaud her team and all those that were involved in getting the money out the door, because that's a great accomplishment given the short timeline that we had and all the wrinkles to work through. The shift now is really to phase 2. And as I told my team yesterday, we got to the moon in 2020, but 2021, we're gonna have to get to Mars, because now we have to pivot to the next set of challenges that are in front of us. The work is not over. There are several key efforts on the devices themselves. Of course, we will continue to provide support and break fix for all the devices for the next 2.5 years, so into the June of 2023. So all districts will soon have a pool of spares, and then the ongoing break fix will be up and running fully by January 4th, and we will be then receiving good data back and forth between us and the vendors to make sure that we understand how efficiently we are supporting the districts and ensuring that these devices continue to work for teachers and students, because any downtime is a loss of educational opportunity, and we want to minimize that as much as possible. There are lots of lines of work, of course, going forward, but a big one is professional development. We want to maximize as much support and training and really whatever they need to help ensure that the teachers and the administrators and counselors are able to leverage the technology. The technology doesn't work if the people aren't able to use them or if they're not connected across the internet. So connectivity will remain a focus for us, as well as professional development. We'll be talking during the executive session about a candidate we're bringing forward for the director of digital learning to help lead that work within my shop. But we're also working to hire coaches across the state to deploy them and help intersect with all of the vendors who are providing services that have either been paid for or are offered as an in-kind contribution to the state, or is just simply available through the nature of the licenses that we have in place for the learning management systems, et cetera. A second big line of work that going forward beyond professional development will be data collection. So there is a piece of the work that we're doing right now that will help integrate data across the different platforms so that we can see, and then more importantly, the schools can see how the devices are working, whether or not they are able to connect, whether or not the students are able to engage with the software to log in to use the platforms. And then for the schools, they'll be able to link that back to student performance and have the opportunity to really understand whether the work that they're doing through the digital learning system is to having the educational outcomes, which of course is what we're after in the long run. So lots to come in terms of discussions at the district and state level about this work, but we're really excited to go into phase 2 as I think can declare that we've had a very big success with phase 1. So that is my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, John. I would be remiss to not also really give a shout out to the Lieutenant Governor and his office and to the Office of the State Auditor, because we were able, with the update from the U.S. Treasury, to extend some timelines, and we would not have been able to have accomplished that had we not had both the Lieutenant Governor's Office and the State Auditor's Office working with us on that. So I really want to commend them for that. And I really have got to give a shout out not only to John and Felicia's team, who've done just a yeoman's job over these past few months, but the entire provide feedback and to review documents and to help prepare for webinars. And so it's something that's very exciting. It's something that no other state in the nation has done. And Mississippi can just be so proud of where we are right now, and lots of great things to come. So just a big thank you to everybody for that. I've got
yes, ma'am. I do have a quick, just two quick, one comment / question, then a comment on so thank you very much for the report on the professional development piece of this, because as echo what everyone else has already said. I mean, this will be remembered as an enormous effort, successfully executed. But John, as you've already recognized, moving on to the professional development is kind of like the next big thing, and that obviously includes everyone from kids to parents to administrators to teachers. But one question I have, and we don't have to answer this now, but and it might be something that we develop. But as I think about the whole spectrum of those involved with it, I think about the technology coordinators, and I know there's some districts that just are outstanding, and there's probably some districts that need a little extra support. But in order to think about where the differences are, it should start with some sort of baseline of how do we measure the efficacy of our technology coordinators, and can we create some sort of metric that says, okay, this one's good, this one needs to have some help, so that we can focus the resources there. So I don't know, is that, like I said, I don't want to spend any time talking about that, but if there's an answer already, I'd love to know that we're thinking about that.
Oh, sure. And I could turn this into a 30-minute discussion of all the work we're doing on the technical side, but I will try to be as brief as possible. You're right that there are a number of challenges that we have at the district level, and it varies by district. Different environments, there's some that are Google environments, some are Windows, some are Apple environments, some are a mix of those. We have been doing a lot in terms of webinars on how to help them get up and running on this. And as the devices themselves begin to intersect with reality on the ground, where they're now connecting with their networks and their kids are using them remotely, there are a lot of challenges that are related to just simply moving to the cloud that districts need a lot of help with. And this is a big, long story, as I said, that goes, we can spend more time on it at a later date if that would be of interest to the board. But we are working to both get some engineers up and running, as well as within the with the digital learning coaches piece of getting extra support for the technical staff, because this revealed a lot about where the districts are and the challenges they face. And just as the commitment of the MDE to ensure that the devices set a minimum sufficient threshold of working devices in terms of mobile device management and web filtering and other software, we need to make sure that there is a minimum level of support from us to ensure that all districts can maintain operations without too much of a disruption. So that is a very big topic that we're working on within OTSS, and we are moving on several fronts on that. But absolutely, we are keyed into that, and that's part of our ongoing efforts.
So without, hopefully any additional work, it would be nice in January or February just to understand the baseline specific. I'm more interested in tech coordinators, but any other data. I'm not asking for you guys to divert, but as you go along and collect information, and you can put it into some framework, because if there are, significant deficiencies, we'd like to, think through in what ways we can start, addressing those. The second point I want to make, this is just a comment, as I've been monitoring some of the chatter around getting the computers out to the districts. Not most of it positive, but the negative comments have sort of called a theme, and it's not really negative about anything other than the fact that the broadband availability is continues to be an issue. And as I've said from the beginning, we're not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And the $50 million in the House Bill 1788 you mentioned was a big step. We all know the rural EPAs received significant funding, I think 150, 160 million with their match. But the big news a week ago was an announcement from the FCC's reverse auction of $456 million that will be coming to Mississippi, second only behind California. And it's already, the reverse auction has already been held. So the ISPs have already bid and are in line. We've now got to move to, finding customers, et cetera. But let me just tell you, that is a massive shot in the arm to bring high-speed internet to where it currently isn't. So anytime you hear some of this pushback about, well, you're giving computers to kids, that don't have internet, we're working on it. Not only, the 50 million, but add the 450 and the 160, gosh, now you're talking real money. So, I just want to say there's always, I don't mean to, try and, put our critics in a corner, but I'm saying that's a big deal. The $456 million is going to go a long way. So broadband, number one issue, not really in our control. But that's, being addressed in significant ways. So that's the only comment I have on that. Back over to you, Dr. Wright.
Okay, thank you. I wanted Dr. Gavin to bring you up to speed on the proposed budget for FY 2022, which is going to be coming up in this legislative session, because there are some significant cuts that have been proposed for the agency. And also I want her to review with you the MAAP calculations, because they were a little bit different this year because of the status of where we are in terms of free and reduced lunch. So Dr. Gavin, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. As you know, the Legislative Budget Committee annually, they make a recommendation to the legislature as it relates to funding for the state agencies. And with the Mississippi Department of Education's budget, the recommendation, well, as you know, a large portion of the education budget is centered around MAAP. The majority of the budget is MAAP dollars. There's less than 1% of the total MDE's budgets that actually is included for the operation of MDE. So the recommendation that was made, when you look at it in detail, it's really about a 35% cut to the agency, because a large portion of our budget is specified items, it's flow-through items, and other specified items. So just based on the recommendation, that would be about a $7 million cut to the agency. So that's pretty significant. And I know a large portion of that, that cut was for unfilled PNs, unfilled vacancies that they saw and recommended that they cut those particular positions. But when you look at those pens, a lot of those pens are actually not funded with state dollars. A lot of those pens are federal dollars. And a lot of those pens that were swept were not even funded at the agency. So it would be really tough for the agency to absorb a $7 million cut. We don't know specifically, they don't go into that level of detail of what the flow through items would be, but just assuming that it's the same flow through items as last year, we would be looking at a $7 million cut in general funds to the agency. For MAAP, they did recommend level funding based on FY21's funding, so it would be level funding. CTE was level funded in their recommendation, but keep in mind that was a cut over prior years, so level funding for CTE is still a pretty significant cut. MSBD, our Mississippi School for the Deaf and Blind, there was a $2 million recommendation cut there. And then Chickasaw was recommended at the requested level. So overall, again, it would mean a $7 million cut to the agency if this particular recommendation was adopted by the legislature. And Dr. Wright, MAAP is an item further down on the agenda. So
then let's just keep it there. I'm sorry, I forgot that part. Perfect. Any questions on the cut? I know this is preliminary, but this is significant because we don't have this kind of money to cut. And the only place that the majority of our budget is people. And that's what we use to get the work done that we've been getting done over the past few years. So that's why I wanted to lift this up. This is not an insignificant cut.
Let me ask a question on the pens that are federally funded, even though it's federal money that's coming in for a position, you still have to have the pen for the position. Is that correct?
That's correct.
that's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right. I wanted just to bring you quickly an update, if there's no other questions for Felicia, then on enrollment. As you know, when we began the school year, when the numbers started coming in from the districts, we were seeing a significant decrease. The total number was somewhere north of 23,000 students that were in Mississippi public schools last year that did not then return this year. So we charged the school attendance officers with trying to ensure that they find every single one of these children and make sure that they're in a learning environment. So if they were in homeschool, that's fine. If they were in private school or parochial school, that was fine. But what we didn't want was just children just being kept at home for no reason whatsoever that were of compulsory age. As you know, Mississippi's compulsory age starts at age 6. So even though we had about 4,400 fewer kindergartners this year than we did last year, since it's not a compulsory age, there's really not too much we can do about that. That is a concern because those would have been children that would have been in kindergarten. And as you know, our data continue to show that only 1 out of every 3 of our kindergartners comes ready for kindergarten. And that's on a good day, right? That's when we're all in school and providing instruction. So that drop was significant. What we did find as of yesterday, I believe, that number has now been reduced from over 23,000 to just around 900. So we've located all but 900 children, and we will continue to try and validate where those children are. But we did see a significant increase in the number of children that are homeschooled. In fact, that number increased by over 6,700 children that went to homeschooling. We have known that our enrollment is dropping. It has been over a period of time, but not by 23,000. It's typically been dropping by about 5,000 to 5,500. So that was a significant decrease for us. That produces a lot of problems for the districts, and not the least of which is ADA. Because as you know, the MAAP formula has a portion of ADA in that formula. And that is a concern of all of the districts around the drop in ADA and the potential impact that would have on school funding. And with some districts, that could be pretty significant. Others may not be as significant. And I know I think Mr. East has already pretty much taken a look at that. And Glenn, if you certainly want to chime in, feel free about what that impact would even look like just for Gulfport.
We're beginning to crunch those numbers ourselves, and we would probably at this point have about $1 million loss on ADA, not because we're not trying to get out there and make sure kids are in school and doing their part, but you have the virtual component and making sure they're focused on a daily basis, and keeping that perfect attendance record for us is very difficult. So there's no doubt that I'm hearing from superintendents that ADA is an issue in a lot of places. For us, enrollment is up in our district, but the average daily attendance actually is down from, we usually normally run around 95% in our schools, and we're doing 92 or 93% during this pandemic time. So
I do think this is something the board needs to lean in on. I think with the legislature, if there's ever a year that we need to hold districts harmless for ADA, it is this year. So I think that needs to be a conversation from ADA to ADM, or average daily membership, because membership typically doesn't change. I mean, obviously in the pandemic it's changing, but typically average daily membership does not change. So even when ADA is calculated, it really can cause some issues for districts, because they still have to account for all the children that they're servicing, whether they're in attendance on that day that the ADA is calculated. So I'll keep you posted on this, but I did want to lift this up as an issue as we move into the legislative session. And on that note, the last update I want you to provide to you is Nathan Oakley is going to give you an update. We surveyed the districts right before the holidays about what their plans were for returning to school, to get an idea of how many were going to remain virtual, how many were going to remain in, was it going to be an increase in person, or the method of using a hybrid model. So I'm going to ask Nathan Oakley just to bring you a real quick update on that. And then that will, after Nathan finishes, that will conclude my report. Nathan?
Thanks, Dr. Wright. So quickly, to give you a little bit of context, in the fall when schools started, roughly half of our schools across the state or districts were offering an option, a classroom instruction option for their students, but offering parents an option to go virtual if they wanted to. And then we had a smaller, that was 48% of districts statewide in the beginning of the fall semester. And then we had about a fourth of our districts that were running a hybrid schedule, and then smaller amounts that started virtual and shifted to in-person or ran virtual only for the full fall. As we moved through the fall semester, as you're all aware, we started to see spikes in numbers, increases in numbers. And so we had a number of districts that looked specifically, as we asked them about, what are you going to do between Thanksgiving and the Christmas break, between the fall and the spring semester? And we saw a slight increase and some flexibility from districts, which is really what we were looking for them to be responsive to their local need, to their local caseloads, working with the local health department to design the instructional approach that was going to work best for their community. We saw a slight increase in the number of districts that went virtual only during this time period we're in right now, between Thanksgiving and the semester break. And then we saw our other numbers remain pretty steady though, but our virtual only increased from 12% as we started the fall up to 15% between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then as we look at the spring, we're seeing some districts that are returning to some face-to-face instruction. Only 1% to 2% of our districts this fall offered a classroom-only solution for the students in their district. And we're seeing 8% of our districts going into the spring that anticipate doing classroom-only. And we're seeing a reduction in the number of districts and percentage of districts that are doing virtual only. From that transition period right now of 15% doing virtual only, down to about 8% doing virtual only through the spring semester. 85% of our districts statewide in the spring are looking at offering classroom instruction with a parent option for virtual if they need it, or a hybrid model where students are rotating in and out of the school building, maybe 1 day a week or 2 days a week. The majority of districts, when they're looking at that hybrid model, students are getting most of their instruction in the classroom rather than a remote setting. And then the final piece that we asked districts about recently was around their spring contingency plan. As we're in the midst of flu season, and as we expected to see COVID numbers increase again with colder weather and people being indoors more, we're seeing a number of districts that are, as we asked about contingency, we're seeing 82% of our districts together looking at either full virtual or a combination of full virtual and packets for their contingency solution in the spring. And so that was encouraging to us that we've got a lot of districts that are weighing that virtual option as a solution to try to control for spread of the virus. An additional 13% of our districts responded that they intended to use some other approach. But when we actually dug in and looked at that 13% that said other, that was really districts that are looking at doing virtual, but they're doing maybe a combination of virtual and packets, and they made some other notes like, we're doing virtual, but we're going to make sure we have USB drives to address connectivity for students that don't have a high-speed internet connection. Or we're doing virtual, but we'll provide packets at parents' request. So that their districts just took a little opportunity to provide some more nuance to their response. Only 5% of our districts have indicated for the spring that their intention is to go with a packet or assignment-based approach for contingency delivery in the spring semester. So again, we were pleased with what we saw from the sense that we, as the semester shifted over the course of the fall and as districts looked to the spring, we're seeing some flexible responses there and some responsiveness at the local level to address their community need. Be glad to take any questions.
Any questions from board members? All right, good job. Thanks for that update, and it's definitely moving in the right direction. And we've been sharing that data with the governor and the lieutenant governor's speaker's office as well, and they're very pleased to know that's the trend. So thanks again, Nathan and your team. Dr. I believe you said that would conclude your report, so I'll just
Yes,
move
sir.
in.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
I'll move into mine quickly, and then we'll turn over to our student representatives. And again, I've had the pleasure to participate in several panels. Mississippi continues to gain national attention about concerning some of the reforms that have been put into place and the results. It's been a super nice accolade to be invited, but also kind of brings up the question about the need for learning acceleration that will come up. But we'll deal with that one in January. I participated in also an Ed Palooza panel with Dr. Tanette Smith with the department, focused on the third grade reading gate and lessons learned from that. Dr. Smith is in Dr. Oakley's shop, and she just did a fantastic job. Couldn't brag on her enough for representing, the challenges that we went through and the successes that we've been able to achieve. So hats off to Dr. Smith in supporting that panel with me. Also did the Starting at Zero panel hosted by Ole Miss a couple of weeks ago, focused on early childhood education. I joined a group called the Mississippi Early Childhood Investment Council, made up of mostly business leaders to focus on early childhood ed policy. So more to come on that. Also, just will make one or two more comments. And the first one is, we've been meeting with Governor Reeves and his staff pretty regularly, as you can imagine, concerning the questions about accountability and what we refer to as a decoupling of accountability with assessment. So just, as I've said in past meetings, just to be clear, my sense is that there's really no support for not doing assessments. I mean, there might be some, but I think the overwhelming desire from parents, from political leadership is, we want to see assessments and we want to see where we are. That's different than accountability. And we know that for the practitioners, educators out there, this is top of mind issue for most folks. We're getting there. I think, with the current change, what looks to be a change in administration, which means a change in U.S. Department of Ed leadership, to move before we understand what that looks like is probably just a little premature, but recognizing the timeline, that our districts have to be on in order to administer these tests, we're very sensitive to that. So that's a lot of talk to say it's probably going to be January, but rest assured, we're in constant conversation with the governor. He hasn't, weighed in yet on, he seemed to not necessarily object to the decoupling concept, but was very much for doing the assessment. So more to come. Hopefully at our January meeting, we'll be able to bring this up and vote on it, so we can give an indication to our leadership out there throughout the state, what's going to happen. The last thing I have on my agenda is would like to welcome Ronnie McGehee, the latest board member appointed by the Lieutenant Governor as an at-large member. We have sworn in Dr. McGehee, so he is all official. He's bonded and ready to go. And I just asked you, sir, if you'll just give us a couple of minutes of quick intro of who you are, and just would say to you, welcome aboard. Dr. McGehee.
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you so much. And I'm so appreciative to be able to serve with you guys. And I know most of you on the call, and those that I don't know, I look forward to meeting and working with you for our young people and our educators in the state of Mississippi. I'm a 41-year educator. I spent 21 years in Madison County, and I've basically been involved in just about every position in the school that one could have. Dr. Rucker in Rankin County years ago even talked me into being a transportation supervisor. So not only have I driven the bus, cleaned the bus, and everything else inside of it. I think the comments earlier were conducive to the tech rollout, listening to superintendents and tech directors across the state. You are to be applauded for your actions, and not only that, your way that you did, the way you performed your activity, were applauded across the state. I look forward to solutions because we are in the people business, and we need to take care of our people in the state of Mississippi so they can be prosperous in the future. So I look forward to working with you.
Great. Thank you, sir. And again, welcome aboard. Okay, that's it for my report. So we'll move now into the report from our student representatives, Omar and Amy. Omar, over to you.
Hello, board members. I came today to discuss the Student Advisory Council and what we've done so far to discuss issues in the Department of, not the Department of Education, just the school realm. We polled the topics that we found from our first Student Advisory Council meetings, and we found that improving virtual learning for students is still a majority issue among students, as well as mental and emotional health resources. But we also found several other key issues that the Student Advisory Council would like to talk about the next 2 or 3 coming months, and poll some solutions, some potential solutions for all students and teachers alike. We also are planning our next 2 meetings for January and February, as well as some smaller student-led meetings in between those times to discuss these issues and find some potential solutions for them. But I think that our Student Advisory Council has really grown since the first year that we have had it. It's only been a thing for, I think, since 2020, but they've really grown in understanding their responsibilities and how they can talk to us, Amy and I, about how to resolve these issues and how the State Board of Education is responsible for some issues and how their local boards are also responsible for other issues. So I think that understanding has really helped everybody, all students alike, understanding what we are capable of helping with. But I'm really looking forward to talking more with the student advisory councils and just amending some of these issues that we see fit to solve as of current. Over to Amy.
All right, good morning. I would like to go off of what Omar said, and I would like to elaborate on the virtual learning and the mental and emotional health topics that we talked about. So first, for virtual learning, we talked about Mississippi Connects at the beginning of the meeting. And most people agreed that it was really important that everyone had the necessary technology to learn virtually. Some students did bring up their concerns that at their districts or at their schools, virtual instruction was not as good as in-person instruction. So most of the proposed solutions were to make like lessons and things covered on the syllabus consistent regardless of if learning was virtual or in-person or hybrid. We also had discussions about how teachers could improve virtual instruction by giving students the necessary materials and support for virtual learning and by keeping pace with, in-person lessons at school. We also talked about mental and emotional health, and we had a lot of discussions about that. Dr. Wright mentioned telehealth and telemedicine, and in January, we'll have a special meeting about our mental and emotional health with Dr. David Elkin, who's a child and adolescent psychologist, and he will be discussing strategies on how to, deal with stress. So moving on to the discussions that we had afterwards, several students brought up concerns about the limitations of their counselors, since not everyone necessarily feels close enough with them to fully discuss their mental health. And they said that it's especially noticeable this year because of COVID, and a lot of students are feeling more stressed than normal. So overall, I think that the meeting went very well. As mentioned earlier, Omar and I are currently organizing work groups for the topics that the council wants to discuss further. And I am really looking forward to our next meeting next year.
Great report. Any questions from the board?
I'd just like to, if a moment, please, just to say to Omar and Amy that they are helping direct this group into what we visualized what the vision was when we organized, when Dr. Kelly led the effort to get student representatives. So I just wanted to express my appreciation to them, because they're moving it in the right direction and providing good feedback to Dr. Wright and to the board as to what the issues are out there and what the feeling is among the students. So thanks, fellas, and we look forward to hearing from you in January.
Yeah, I really just want to echo that because it was their feedback and it was universal around the issues around social and emotional health that we reached out to Dr. Elkin, who is willing and is coming to their next meeting in January to really give them strategies and then strategies that they in turn can use or share, with their friends. So they're a dynamic group of young people, and they're very, very helpful to me in giving us feedback and letting us know what we can be doing to help them. So hats off to both Omar and Amy and the group as a whole. They've done a really good job.
Yeah, and I was just going to add one more comment as a practical example of how this conversation gets into policy. The governor has a discretionary pot of money. It's called GEAR, the Governor's Emergency Education Response Fund. And the second round, which has just been awarded, the first priority was to fund programs and proposals focused on social and emotional learning. And I read 5, but we had 140 proposals submitted, by the way. I read 5 of them. And of those 5, 4 of them were focused on social and emotional learning. And I know that the grants have been awarded. I haven't seen any list of who's all been awarded, but I know that many of them focus on social and emotional learning were funded to the tune of millions of dollars. So, it's nice to talk about it, but when actually resources follow policy, to me, that's what's, where the rubber hits the road. We can all get it all day long, but until we get some resources to address it. But that's one of those moments, that you see a paradigm shift where people recognize it and are willing to put money where they could easily have put it somewhere else. So just know that your work contributed to that. Okay, Sonia, unless I'm missing something, we didn't have any subcommittee meetings. I don't think that we did. So then we'll just move straight into the discussion and approval of board items, number 9 on your list. We'll start with the first one, action item. Paula, I'll tee you up. Begin the APA process to revise standards around, I think this is ACT work keys and accountability model. Over to you, Paula.
Good morning. We do have a brief presentation for you regarding the recommendation to include work keys in the Mississippi statewide accountability system. We have followed our process that we use consistently, which is working with our accountability task force and then vetting the recommendation that they make to the MDE. to our technical advisory committee prior to moving that on to the Commission on School Accreditation and then to the State Board of Education. So this item today is asking for board approval to submit to begin the APA process for public comment and feedback regarding the methodology that we'll use to incorporate the work keys. Public comments at the January board meeting. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Alan and he'll walk you through the specifics because what we did at MDE, we modified the recommendation that the Accountability Task Force actually made to the department. Mr. Brewer will provide you with the rationale for that modification. However, just so you'll know, the Commission on School Accreditation did unanimously approve the recommendation that the MDE made to the Commission, which modified the Accountability Task Force recommendation. Mr. Brewer?
All right, let me see if I can get my screen shared. Let's see, whoever is the host will need to enable me to do screen sharing, looks like.
And we provided that to Joshua this morning, the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, I'm getting a note that host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, is the host Josh or is the host Deborah? Because I can go speak to Deborah. She's right outside my office.
We emailed it to Joshua per Tamala's directive. So Joshua, can you share the PowerPoint presentation that was emailed to you regarding the ACT work keys?
It's Jonathan that is controlling it. So Deborah is going.
Jonathan, you should be able to share it now.
I'm still getting the notification that it's disabled.
He needs to have access. So he needs to, whoever is controlling it needs to enable him to do that.
Okay, try it now.
Okay, now it looks like it's going to give me access. Okay, so you should be able to see a PowerPoint now, hopefully. All right, so this will just help me step through this background on what Paula was talking about. Of course, anytime we're dealing with anything in regards to accountability, everyone is probably well aware of the impact that it has to the vision and mission of the agency and the strategic plan goals of the board. Accountability tends to touch on all of these. So just to kind of tee this up and give you an idea of what area of accountability we're talking about, we're looking at the college and career readiness component and incorporating ACT work keys. It will specifically, as this recommendation addresses, look at the college and career readiness component, which is shaded here in gray, of the accountability indicators for high schools and districts. So currently, you may recall the college and career readiness component focuses on whether or not a student meets the benchmark on the ACT assessment, and that's the benchmark that ACT establishes. It hasn't changed for many years, but whether or not the student scores an 18 in English or 22 in reading and a 22 on the math components of the ACT. And so there's two pieces, English or reading and math, and a student can score for accountability purposes a 0, a half a point, or 1 point, depending on if they meet one benchmark or if they beat two benchmarks. And those are aggregated up to a score at the district and high school level that is equivalent to a possible 50 points. So the Accountability Task Force has been looking at the inclusion of ACT work keys into the accountability model as a response to an external request to include work keys since March of 2020. So this has been in discussion for quite a while. Many options were considered by the task force, whether or not to put it in college and career readiness or some other area. And this was the area that the task force looked at most interested in was putting it as a alternative to the ACT benchmarks in college and career readiness. So the MDE reached out to ACT and actually contracted with the ACT to run data, impact data, specifically to look at the comparison of performance on ACT work keys to that of our currently established ACT benchmarks using students in Mississippi. What we looked at was whether or not a student who graduated, we looked at the graduates from spring of 2019 and whether or not those graduates received a NCRC from ACT. Now, the NCRC is a certificate that is awarded based on a student's performance on ACT work keys. And there are 4 certificates they can receive: bronze, silver, gold, or platinum, based on the level that they score on the component test of the ACT work keys. And this next slide will show these are the 3 tests that students take in work keys: applied math, workplace, documents, and graphic literacy. And if they score a 3 on all 3 of those tests, then they get a bronze level. If they score 4, that's silver, 5 is gold, and 6 and 7 are platinum. And this is a graphic directly from ACT showing this relationship with qualifications for certain occupational positions that the ACT gathers data on at a national level, and their chance of success in those occupations based on the scoring on the NCRC. So then what we wanted to do was compare the scores on NCRC to actual data that we have on these students on the ACT components, for one thing. So these tables show the relationship between the NCRC level that students achieve versus the component scores on ACT in the English component, the reading component, and the math component. And you can see the red line in the table outlines the benchmark for each of those components, as that's what we're currently measuring for college and career readiness. And you can see here that students that earn silver NCRC generally would, on average, meet the ACT English benchmark, but would not achieve the benchmark in ACT reading or ACT math. And they would, on average, those students would be a gold level on the NCRC. So there wasn't a consistent, there wasn't a straight answer, if you would, here, and whether or not silver or gold would be the benchmark to look for, although on average, the NCRC of a gold level would probably be closest to the current measure of college career readiness as measured by the benchmark. Another little area that we looked at here was this chart shows how students currently are scoring in college and career readiness. As I mentioned earlier, students can score a 0 if they don't meet any benchmarks on ACT, a half a point if they meet one, but not the other. And if they get both benchmarks, then their college and career readiness score is a 1. And the numbers that we have here are counts of our sample for each NCRC level and how that student scored on the current college and career readiness indicator. And the percentage you see on these bars represents the percent of total. So percent total of the sample. So for example, if we said that ACT silver NCRC level was the measure for student performance, successful student performance alone, almost 13% of our sample population scored a silver on NCRC, but did not meet either benchmark on the ACT. So kind of a mixed bag here, but again, the data does point to a higher level, more so of a gold or platinum on the NCRC for an indication of success at least in the extent of our current measures of college and career readiness, which would be over here in this table with a score of 1. Following discussion of that data, the task force still felt that the silver level be used as the minimum performance level for student success on ACT work keys, primarily citing that that's what businesses in their experience are requesting that students achieve in order to be considered for a position in the jobs that are offered. So the MDE looked at the consideration of the silver level based on that recommendation from the task force and discussed that within the department along with consultation for the Center for Assessment and ran that recommendation through the Technical Advisory Committee. An alternative proposal was made in order to consider the silver level NCRC on ACT work keys, that we also consider some additional indicator of student performance and not just the silver NCRC alone. And that the other indicator of student performance would be that if a student receives a silver NCRC, that they also have a completion of an industry certification or a career pathway in order to be considered successful on ACT work keys silver level performance. So this accomplishes a few things. One, it provides stronger evidence of post-secondary readiness than just looking at the silver level certificate alone. It guards against lowering the bar because as we have seen in the data that I presented, silver level alone does not necessarily indicate a similar level of student performance to the current measure of student success. And also it guards against a possible improper utilization of work keys in order to get points in the CCR component of accountability. Our concerns here extend beyond just that rationale that I offered. Also, we are concerned about if we enter something into this component of accountability that would significantly lower the requirement for student success, we would be concerned about continuing to have a valid and reliable measure of student performance in college and career readiness, but also a significant impact to the score on this accountability component that would result in a reset of cuts. So as I said, the MDE makes this recommendation that's not necessarily in line with that of the Technical Advisory Committee. In line with the Accountability Task Force that the silver be used alone, but adds these additional measures of student indicators of success. And that was reviewed and backed up by the Technical Advisory Committee and across departments within the agency. So that's the recommendation that we brought forward to you today, that the ACT Work Key Silver NCRC be considered in conjunction with an industry certification or career pathway in order to have a measure of student success in the CCR component. So are there any questions in regard to all of that?
Questions from the board?
This is Glenn East. So Alan, in layman's terms, what I've heard you say is that, let me first ask this question, this will be included in the acceleration piece of accountability, or where will it be included if they meet these standards?
This would be in the college and career readiness component. So on this slide, it's the gray shaded.
All right, glad you clarified that for me. So what I heard you say is that to be included there, if they have the minimum silver, they must have a CTE course that goes with it, or passing of that kind of a course or pathway. And then for gold, and not gold, but what bronze and platinum, those scores are above the benchmark, so they would automatically without the extra, or? all three of those categories?
No, we would be looking at, in order to use ACT Work Keys as a successful measure of college and career readiness in this component, they need to score a silver or higher and have an industry certification or career pathway.
So for silver, bronze, and platinum, they'd have to have both of those components to be part of the
silver, gold, and platinum, yes.
Right, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, other questions from board members? Okay, not hearing any. This is a request for a motion under the Office of Chief Accountability Officer. Do I have a motion to approve item 1 to begin APA on the presentation you were just provided?
So moved, Glenn Gulfport.
Okay, got a motion, second?
Second.
Got a second from Dr. McGee. Is there any additional questions or discussion? Hear none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Felicia, we'll move to you now with approval of MDE contracts.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dean. We have coming before the board today 2 renewals and 1 new contract. The first contract, item A, is to renew a contract with several contractors for Braille textbooks, and this is year 2 of a 5-year contract.
Hey, Dr. Gavin, I'm sorry, as you go, since we have several, let's just pause and ask for questions. You just take the lead, and if there's any questions board members have, let's do them as we go so we don't get lost at the end, okay? Sorry, Dr. Gavin, go ahead.
Any questions on our contract A, on item A? Okay. Moving on to item B, it's a contract with GuideSoft. And this contract, it's an IT contract for support to the local school districts. No questions there. Moving on to contract item 2C, and it's to renew. This is a renewal with GuideSoft, and it is for a couple of positions, and it is for support within the Office of MDE.
Mr. Chairman, talk to me about GuideSoft. Give me what we're trying to do here, just to catch the new guy on the block on what this does, if you don't mind. Just.
I will turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Cranen, to answer specific questions related to the OTSS services provided by GuideSoft.
Thank you.
Sure. So there is a vehicle that's available through ITS for staff augmentation. And so we've been bringing in skill sets that we do not possess or need, and have leveraged some of our grant monies to help augment our staff. And the first piece was for augmenting, to Chairman Dean's question earlier about technical support to the districts. The second one is for internal capacity as part of our MSIS modernization efforts that are currently underway.
Very good, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so let's see. Under the Office of Chief Operations Officer, do I have a motion to approve items 2A, 2B, and 2C?
Karen Elam, so moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I second it, Rosemary.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Hear none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? All righty, motion carries. Let's go to action item 3, approval of MD grant awards. Dr. Gavin.
Okay. The first item on the agenda is to approve an educator in residence competitive grant. Any questions on the backup is attached in your information. Are there any questions on this particular ERR grant? Okay. Moving on, the second item is actually a methodology. We would have brought this to the board last month. Typically what you see is the methodology presented in 1 month, and then next month you'll actually see the request to approve the grant. But we're bringing both items for your approval today. The first item is actually the methodology to modify some requirements of our residency in education program. And then item C is actually the modification of an existing grant. We're seeking an additional modification in funding of $350,000 for the teacher residency program. So item B is actually the revised methodology, and item C is the request for the additional funding related to the teacher residency program.
Right, this is just, this is this way because of the November meeting.
Yes.
Okay, any questions on?
Mr. Chairman, let me just for a point of clarification. Our school district is involved in the MTR. Do I need to not vote on this issue because it directly affects us, or what do I need to do legally there?
Yeah, please recuse yourself from the vote, but you're allowed to ask any questions you have. All right. Any questions? Okay. Hear none under the Office of Chief Operations Officer to have a motion to approve items 3A, 3B, 3C. And by the way, if you're speaking or voting, please remember to unmute.
Karen Elam, so moved.
Ronnie McGehee, second.
Okay, there's a motion second. Any additional discussion? Let's do a voice vote on this one. All those in favor, I'll go around. Miss Altman.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. McGehee.
Yes.
Dr. Elam.
Yes.
Let's see. Yeah, so I was just saying, I was going to mark Mr. Issa as recusing himself. So motion carries. Okay, we'll move on then to item number 9.4 on the telework. Joe Goff.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Bean. So first, some background concerning teleworking and throughout state government in the last year, and also, of course, at our agency during the pandemic. On March 16, Monday, March 16, Governor Reeves issued Executive Order 1458. And in that executive order, the governor mandated that all state agencies, boards, and commissions, and I'm quoting here, determine if essential employees' core functions and duties could be performed from home to minimize interaction and risk of transmission in the workplace, and where feasible for all state agencies, boards. MDE, like most other state agencies, and at the time, implemented a telework plan for staff. And the agency's policy, it was then ultimately put in place in section 7.1 of the Employee Procedures Manual. That is included in your backup material along with the agency's telework assignment form. So a few key points I wanted to make as far as talking about the policy and its implementation in the last year. Of course, the purpose of the telework policy and the purpose of the governor's executive order, it was to ensure continuity of operations, that the agency, any state agency that has a telework program in place for their employees during the pandemic, but we got to make sure that the work is being done, of course. And it's a balance there as far as creating a policy and implementing that policy at an agency for policy to be successful. And we knew that the agency knew for our telework policy to be successful, it needed to be very specific in what the employees, the expectations for employees and supervisors, exactly what is expected from them. And our policy, when you look at it, our policy does that. Our policy is very clear and it's detailed. Bottom line, our employees' job duties and responsibilities, they do not change. I won't go into detail with our 8-page policy, but in summarizing it, our expectations for staff, they do not change. And in fact, I would submit that our policy requires that each employee that they must demonstrate motivation to ensure success of the telework assignment. That means that an employee that they must work at a consistent high rate of productivity we have in our policy. They must exhibit good organizational skills and the ability to work independently. They must be accessible and responsive and in communication always with supervisors, coworkers, and the people that we serve. The policy demands a lot, frankly, from a teleworking employee, but it also, when you review it, it demands a lot from our supervisors. Have significant responsibilities also. First, the policy, it mandates and it gives guidelines for supervisors and managers to determine which employees are eligible for a telework program, which employees do their duties transition to where they could be given a telework assignment. And of course, not all of our employees' duties allow for teleworking. Most of our employees, in fact, are assigned on a rotation status where they are on a telework status place for part of that time also, with the goal to be to try and minimize the risk of transmission in the workplace and contact in the workplace. But we first have to make that determination in our policy on whether or not an employee is do their job duties transition to be eligible for teleworking. And I can tell you there are a number of our employees that we're not able to allow for teleworking because their job duties just don't allow for it. Also, in our policy, managers, they have to make sure that the employee's alternative work site that they're proposing for the telework assignment, that location, that it's appropriate and that it's suitable for the employee to perform their duties there in that location. We can ask for and demand photographs of the designated work area. Managers must make sure that, of course, that in that assignment that all MDE information is maintained in a safe and confidential manner. And of course, for the employee to be successful, necessary equipment and supplies to be able to do their job successfully. And that requires a lot of coordination with our property office, with OTSS, with HR. So our policy, it addresses all of these issues to ensure everybody is on the same page of exactly what is required for an employee if they are allowed for a telework assignment during this pandemic period. The very last page of the backup documentation, it also includes an acknowledgement form where it memorializes everything that I just described as far as the telework program and what is the employee must comply with. It's the policy is attached to it. Everybody's on the same page on what's necessary. I'd also a little bit more context and background about our policy. Going back into the spring of 2020, when agencies were first mandated with the executive order, and represent to you from in my role at the time, I was deputy director of the State Personnel Board. Agencies implemented teleworking, but there was not a consistent process, consistent and centralized guidelines for agencies to implement a telework program. Our policy, the Department of Education's policy, it was ultimately sent to, and it was the State Personnel Board adopted the Mississippi Department of Education's policy. After seeing our policy, the MSPB, which is the central HR management agency for all 130 state agencies, boards, and commissions, there's 26,000 state employees under the purview of the State Personnel Board. And they said personnel policy for all of those state agencies and state employees. They ultimately adopted the Department of Education's telework policy. It was placed in a template format, and it was sent then over the summer to all state agency HR directors and executive directors. It was sent to them as a model policy for them to use as they implement their own policy. Just a couple of other points that I would make also, Dr. Dean. Dr. Wright's constantly, of course, directing our leadership here at the agency to ensure that managers are assessing the success of all telework assignments for staff. Cassandra Moore, the Human Resources Director here at the agency, and myself, we just recently, within the last week and a half, we did training for over 97 managers here at the agency concerning the State Personnel Board's new performance review system where employees are assessed based upon their job knowledge and technical ability, their use of systems and programs in doing their job, how they make decisions as far as problem solving with their job. And in the training that we did for all of these managers, HR, and providing the training for all of our managers and staff, we focus specifically on ensuring that that's successful and employees are successful and we're monitoring their job performance in an environment of teleworking. And we spent a great deal of time focusing on that. Second thing that I would just mention also is that in March of 2020, Congress passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And in this law that was passed in the spring, it allows for employees 80 hours of federally protected leave for certain virus-related reasons. Those include testing positive or being placed in quarantine due to exposure of the virus. And this leave, it does not count against the state employees' personal or major medical leave allotment that they obtain and accrue from the state of Mississippi, 80 hours that they have. But the Department of Labor, in implementing this law, they state that this leave is eligible for employees who are, quote, unable to telework. So our employees that do allow for teleworking and are placed in that status, if they would otherwise qualify for 80 hours, 10 days of leave for certain coronavirus related reasons, instead, if they're in a teleworking status, they don't miss a beat. And they continue working during that 2-week time period when they would otherwise be eligible for 10 days completely on leave. One last thing that I would say too, we've had a lot of positive tests for employees just within the last 2 weeks, an awful lot of positive tests I can represent to you here in the workplace. And that's not even counting employees who have needed to quarantine due to exposure outside the workplace. There's a big difference here in HR when we get the phone call from a manager and working with a manager about a positive test of an employee when we learned that that employee was in the building, suddenly contacting other folks who came into contact and were exposed to that employee when they were in the building, versus a manager that tells us, look, they have not been in the building since blank day before they started to have symptoms. Totally different experience. And, you know, that employee in that circumstance, again, they are able to just keep rocking along and teleworking. And very last thing I'll say is she told me I could use her as an example, but Paula's not here in the building today. Paula's getting over a positive test all day, but I can represent to you that teleworking has allowed her to continue working. She's a great example of the program and how it can work. And Paula hadn't missed a beat. I can promise you that. Paula Vanderford hadn't missed a beat since dealing with COVID. So I would represent to you that we feel like it's a successful program. It's a model program, our policy that's been being implemented throughout other state agencies. But I'd certainly take any questions that you have.
I appreciate that report, Mr. Goff, and I did a poor job of setting it up. I want to come back to the telework discussion in a second, but going back to the recusal, I just went on mute right when we set this up. Just to clarify, when there's a recusal, there cannot be debate. Obviously, I didn't know that, but the concern I had was with 5 people. If only 4 people voted, were we violating any quorum? The answer is no. So just majority of quorum has the motion passed. So sorry for my distraction, but I wanted to set up that presentation, which I listened to, and think that we're sounds like we're leading the way with the rest of the state on the telework. There was just a couple of questions that I heard from out there with some administrators and some districts about what our policy is, and it sounds like our policy has been fully vetted and in fact held as an example for other state agencies. And I would encourage any district that has any questions or concerns to reach out. Certainly is available to any district that would want to use it for their own purposes. So that was the purpose of that. And sorry for not setting that up better, but very, very proud of that. So now I'll turn it over. Any questions or concerns from our board members before we move on? Okay, hear none. That was an information. We've got 2 more action items before we get to the.
Thank you, Dr. Dean. As the law requires, we're to seek an independent CPA firm to calculate the MAAP funding as well as to determine the student-based cost. So in your package, you do have, and these 2 items really go together, but the first item we'll look at is the student-based cost. And with the pandemic, as Dr. Wright said earlier, the full funding request for MAAP, and also with the USDA extending the summer feeding program, allowing for 100% free lunch participation across the state, that also had an effect on the MAAP calculation. You see in your packages that the student-based cost For last year, for FY21, estimates that we have for this year on the student-based costs is an increase in the health insurance premium of $17.31. And then our normal inflation was $27.42. So the new student-based cost is $5,874.08. That is the FY22 student-based cost that will be used to determine the full funding for MAAP for FY22. Any questions there? And of course, the 100% lunch calculation, that does not play into the student-based cost. It will play into the full funding request of MAAP funding. Okay, moving on to item 6, which is the actual calculation of MAAP. You also have in your packages there. I will point out that due to the decrease in the ADA, that resulted in, and there's several items that will MP. We did see a reduction in ADA. That cost us about $87 million. The full funding for the 100% at-risk allowance for free and reduced lunch, that was an additional $35 million. So the add-on programs, we saw a reduction in the add-on programs because they're driven by the ADA. So we saw a reduction in teacher units for SPED as well as CTE. So there are several variables in the formula that's impacting the full funding requests for FY22. Also, Rule 48.7 allows for the determination of inordinately large absentees. So we did have 33 districts that were included in the calculation, but actually only 11 of those districts qualified based on Rule 48.7. And that did allow us to increase the ADA by 7,937. So with all of that said, our full funding request for FY22 as listed in your package is $2,478,580,418. And that is a reduction from the full funding request of FY 2021. So full funding request for FY 2021 by $57 million. And again, that's largely driven by the reduction in ADA. After we include the 11 districts that we were able to hold harmless, there's a change in ADA attendance of 15,000. So that resulted in an 82 ADA. Any questions?
Well, I'll just have a couple of comments and then we'll get to any other questions. I mean, obviously, this is going to be an unusual year. I don't think there's ever been a usual year when it comes to MAAP, but certainly given the effects of enrollment that's a result of COVID from last year to this year, and certainly being outside of the norm. Dr. Wright mentioned earlier, we've experienced some decline, but it sounds like it's fourfold what the average decline has been. So point one is, recognizing that COVID has had an impact in enrollment, and that we certainly expect some, maybe a majority, if not, vast majority of those students to come back. I think we'll go through the legislative session, advocating for a hold harmless around that while explaining the 100% free and reduced lunch impact, so that we can, it sounds like there might be a trade-off there, certainly. And this will just, be a, as it always is, a maturing discussion as we start in January, and when we end, if we start in January, and when we end in April. So just please recognize from the board and those that are listening in, we are absolutely 100% on top of the issues. Dr. Gavin was, reporting the facts, what the code dictates in terms of driving the MAAP request. So just because that's what you heard doesn't mean that's how it's going to end. So questions or comments from the board? Okay. Don't let me get ahead if y'all interrupt. Otherwise, I'm going to move. There's actually should have been two motions to approve under 5 and 6. So we'll just take them together under the COO motion to approve the final calculation of MAEP for the adequate, the base student costs and for fiscal year 2022.
This is Rosemary. I move for approval.
Okay, is there a second?
Second, Glenn.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hear none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no opposition, motion carries. All right, next we'll move to the consent agenda. It's quite lengthy, A through U. Yeah. A through U on the consent agenda. Under the consent agenda, do I have a motion to approve items A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, and U? That's what happens when you skip a meeting. Is there a motion and a second?
So moved, Karen Elam.
Okay. Motions or second?
Second, Rosemary.
All right. Motion and second. Any discussion on any of the consent agenda items? All right. Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Motion carries. Thank you all very much. Now we'll go into the consideration of executive session.
I've got it. Hang on a minute. I got to pull it back up. I'm going to lose this job. I just know it. It makes me so nervous. Okay. I move that the board consider making a closed determination of the need to go into executive session.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Here none. All those in favor of going into executive session signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, please clear the virtual board.
We are good to go. Go ahead, Aaron.
Aaron, you're on.
It's muted at the.
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Just speak loudly.
Sorry, I was muted. The board has moved to go into executive session for the following reasons. Discussion of discrete personnel matters in accordance with Mississippi Code annotated section 254174A and K related to the following. Approval of the appointments of an Education Bureau Director 2 to serve within the Office of Federal Programs, an Education Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Fiscal Operations within the Office of Special Education, an Education Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Internal Audit within the Office of Educational Accountability, a School Financial Officer to serve within the Office of School Financial Services, an Education Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Assessment at the Mississippi Schools for the Deaf and Blind, an Education Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Logistics and Support within the Office of Accountability, and an Education Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Digital Learning within the Office of Technology and Strategic Services. Mr. Kramer, we can go.
waiting on a response. Yep, we're live.
All right. During executive session, the board moved for approval of the appointment of Ed Bureau Director 2 to serve within the Office of Federal Programs. Chad Daniels approved the appointment of Ed Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Fiscal Operations within the Office of Special Education, LaKenya Moore. Approval of appointment of Ed Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Internal Audit within the Office of Educational Accountability, Tracy Riggin. Approval of the appointment of School Finance Officer to serve within the Office of School of Financial Services, Cora Fuller. Approval of the appointment of Ed Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Assessment at the Mississippi School for Deaf and Blind, LaQuandra Jones. Approval of the appointment of Ed Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Logistics and Support within the Office of Accountability, Kenyatta Stamps. Finally, approval of the appointment of an Ed Bureau Director 2 to serve in the role of Director of Digital Learning within the Office of Technology and Strategic Services, Melissa Banks. And if it seems like it's about twice as much as normal, it's because we did not meet in November. And so it's about, double of what we normally do. And that's the reason that we had 7. Okay, we're kind of getting towards the end of our agenda here. Any report on meetings attended? Wasn't already covered. Any? Okay. Is there a request for approval of attendance of meetings between now and January 21st? I don't think there's any. Okay, we'll move on to other business. The January board meeting will be held on January 21st, 2021 at the Central High School building starting at 10 a.m. That just sounds good, doesn't it? If there's no other business, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Karen Elam.
Motions are second?
Second, Rosemary.
Great. There's motion and second. Any further discussion? Here none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank y'all very much. Enjoy your weekend and have a Merry Christmas and see you in January.
Happy holidays to everybody.